U.S. President Donald Trump's next move on tariffs for Canada.
It is clear that we cannot count or fully rely on what has been our most valued trading relationship for our prosperity.
There's over 250 small manufacturing family-run companies like us in BC. It's going to kill thousands of jobs.
Across America, the sound of hammers is fading. In Texas and Florida, half-built homes stand frozen under the blazing sun. Thousands of miles away in Alberta and British Columbia, trucks loaded with fresh-cut lumber roll out of the mills, not heading south as before, but toward new markets. A trade route once taken for granted is closing. Replaced by PADS Canada is eager to open. And at the heart of it all, Washington's steep softwood lumber tariffs are shaking the very foundations of the U.S. housing market. The question, tactical move, or a golden chance for Canada to rewrite the rules? This August, the White House raised import tariffs on Canadian softwood lumber to nearly 35%. Officially, it's about protecting American jobs and industry. But beneath the slogan lies a harsher truth. The U.S. housing market was already under strain. A nationwide housing shortage, combined with reconstruction after wildfires, hurricanes, and large-scale infrastructure projects, had driven demand to record highs. Let's break it down in today's video. Note, this video is an independent analysis based on public sources. It does not represent any organization or political stance. We encourage you to think critically and share your thoughts in the comments. On paper, America has vast forests, yet its processing power can't keep pace. Sawmill numbers are too low, and the workforce is smaller than decades ago. Experts warn that replacing Canadian imports could take 5 to 10 years if logging regulations were eased, which is far from certain. Canada still supplies 1.44 million cubic meters of softwood every month. Even if the U.S. ramped up domestic production, it could only cover about a third of that, leaving huge gaps that mean hundreds of thousands of delayed home builds each year. The moment the tariffs hit, prices spiked. For builders, that meant stalled projects, higher costs, and sometimes lower quality materials. Families, especially those rebuilding after disasters, felt it hardest. In California, some reconstruction costs have risen by millions in just months. Contractors in Texas suburbs report affordable housing projects being halted mid-frame. Apartment complexes in Illinois are renegotiating contracts, scrambling to source lumber from pricier, less reliable suppliers. For workers, the fallout is immediate. Temporary layoffs, shrinking paychecks, and uncertainty about when projects will resume. For buyers, it's longer waits, smaller homes, or the crushing reality of being priced out entirely. Economists estimate construction costs have jumped 10 to 15% since the tariffs took effect, meaning a wood frame home that once required $40,000 in lumber now costs $4,000 to $6,000 more. The irony is stark. Only a few years ago, Washington promised to tackle the housing crisis by building more homes. Now, the very policies meant to protect an industry risk, making home ownership a distant dream for millions. The debate remains. Will this be remembered as a bold economic defense, or as the moment America built barriers instead of homes? Who would have thought that something as ordinary as softwood lumber could spark one of the longest-running trade battles between Canada and the U.S.? For nearly 50 years, this everyday building material has been at the center of heated disputes. Since the late 1980s, the U.S. has repeatedly slapped anti-dumping and countervailing duties on Canadian lumber, claiming it's sold below market value and boosted by provincial subsidies. These fights come and go, with brief truces between flare-ups. Yet, despite the tension, both nations remain deeply tied through the lumber supply chain. Today, nearly 70% of softwood lumber imported into the U.S. comes from Canada. This isn't just a number. It's in the homes Americans live in, the buildings repaired after storms, and the reconstruction after disasters. The U.S. has the forest to meet its needs, but not the sawmills, workers, or relaxed logging rules to do it quickly. Experts say it could take 5 to 10 years to expand enough to replace Canada's supply, if environmental regulations were eased, which is unlikely. Right now, America can only replace about 30 to 35% of Canada's monthly shipments of 1.44 million cubic meters. That's why Washington's recent move to raise tariffs on Canadian lumber to nearly 35% is risky. Officials say it protects U.S. industry, but in reality, replacing Canada's supply in the short term is almost impossible. The costs will ripple into construction and housing prices. For Canadian sawmill owners, some with decades supplying the U.S., this means canceled contracts and uncertainty. What happens to half-built projects or families waiting for affordable homes? This is where the trade war moves from policy to people's everyday lives. While the U.S. takes a hard-line stance, Canada is playing a longer game. Ottawa has announced a $1 billion support package for its lumber industry. Loan guarantees, subsidies to diversify products, funding for workforce training, and a push toward value-added exports instead of raw lumber. Around $700 million of that goes directly to small and medium-sized businesses, the most vulnerable in this conflict. But Canada's plan links directly to its $25 billion federal housing program, creating domestic demand for lumber, reducing U.S. dependency, and tackling housing needs at home. On the global stage, Canada is already looking at new markets, Japan, Vietnam, and Europe, turning short-term pressure into a chance to diversify exports. This approach is reshaping the industry's mindset. Businesses gain financial security, workers feel protected, and rural communities reliant on lumber see hope for stability. While Washington shields its industry with tariffs, Ottawa builds new markets and strengthens from within. The question is, which approach wins in the long run? The U.S. could import from Europe. Countries like Germany, Sweden, and Finland have advanced timber industries, but geography works against them. Shipping costs skyrocket, and delivery takes weeks, making it useless for urgent needs. Domestic production is already near its limit, with no quick way to scale up due to mill shortages, labor gaps, and environmental restrictions. Replacing Canadian imports entirely? Experts say it's nearly impossible anytime soon. Across the U.S., half-built homes stand silent, tools abandoned, and prices climbing, while just north of the border, Canada's lumber industry is quietly thriving. In British Columbia, Canada's largest softwood producer, the forestry minister once warned that shortages wouldn't just appear in trade reports. They'd hit home prices and construction costs. That prediction is now unfolding. Lumber shortages drive up costs, delay projects, and squeeze housing supply. While the U.S. scrambles for alternatives, Canada remains calm. Rather than rushing to make a deal, Ottawa is seizing the moment, expanding exports to Asia, deepening ties with stable trade partners, and helping 6,000 workers adapt to new markets. This isn't damage control. It's a calculated shift away from relying on the U.S. By choosing protectionism, has Washington given Canada the time and reason to break free from a one-sided trade relationship? This summer, an August 1st deadline from the U.S. government drew a hard line. Accept new terms or face 35% tariffs. With business confidence shaken, long-term contracts grew scarce. On TV, the back and forth of trade delegations looked like a chess match on the brink of checkmate. Canada didn't cave. Instead, it offered a targeted approach, limiting tariffs to certain sectors while floating an unprecedented move: softwood lumber quotas. This was once untouchable territory, but now it's a bargaining chip, possibly in exchange for gains elsewhere. Even British Columbia's premier signaled support, showing both federal and local alignment. Why lumber? It's big enough to apply pressure without sparking all-out political war. Quotas could protect Canada's industry, shield sensitive sectors like dairy and autos, and buy time to grow markets in Asia. Whether the U.S. sees this as weakness or flexibility could decide the outcome. When tariffs hit, the effects were instant. In key states like California, Texas, Illinois, and New York, prices climbed weekly. Construction sites went quiet, and contractors faced cost jumps of 10 to 15% in months. One Texas apartment project saw lumber expenses spike by $3 million in just 60 days. The pain spread beyond construction. Furniture makers, flooring producers, and small factories were squeezed. Shipping costs rose as buyers turned to distant suppliers. Even homeowners reconsidered renovations. Political pressure mounted. Lawmakers from both parties rushed to Ottawa to ease tensions. Yet ironically, tariffs have only accelerated Canada's pivot to other buyers, weakening America's near-exclusive grip on its lumber. Globally, the contrast is clear. South Korea and the EU signed deals with Washington, accepting tariffs for stability. Canada still holds most USMCA advantages, and its core industries remain untouched. Energy, defense, autos, and mining keep flowing across the border without disruption, giving Ottawa the upper hand in patience. Canada is using this moment to diversify, build new partnerships, and prepare for any escalation. The real question: did the U.S. play its strongest card too soon? In the end, the sight of stalled U.S. neighborhoods versus freshly built Canadian ones tells the story. In trade, the loudest voice doesn't always win. Sometimes, patience does. And Canada may be turning U.S. pressure into its biggest opportunity yet. This was just the beginning. Hit that subscribe button and buckle up. Digital Garage has so much more in store.